I'm Chance Dorland, and this is the Spurs Insider, our weekly NBA podcast from ExpressNews.com. Joined now by San Antonio Express News sports writer Jeff McDonald from a Utah hotel room. High class, Jeff. How you doing?
Yeah, it's a glamorous life I'm leading.
That's right. Well, it's glamorous right now for the Spurs because of that bounce-back win against Portland last night after big losses to Minnesota and Houston. We'll talk about all that. Also, talking about an article you recently got out there at expressnews.com called Spurs Bleeding Out 3 Points at a Time, and we'll talk about the upcoming schedule as well. But let's talk about that glamour, just like your hotel room. Good win against Portland. Tell me about it.
Yeah, it was a win they sort of needed just for confidence sake after coming off basically the worst two-game stretch under Greg Popovich. Whenever you have the worst or the best something under Greg Popovich, he's been here for 22 years, so that's eye-opening. But they lost games to Minnesota and Houston by a combined, I think the figure was 69 points. They took back-to-back 30-point drubbings, and that has never happened under Greg Popovich. So they were coming to the Portland game basically limping in, basically just what is going on. Like it's one thing to lose, but to get annihilated the way they did by both the Timberwolves and the Rockets, neither of which I believe had a winning record coming into that game. It's not like they're losing to Golden State or a team like that. So coming to that Portland game, there was real concern about how's this team going to bounce back. And they bounced back well against Portland. It was kind of a tight game in the third quarter. The Spurs opened it up. They had a double-digit lead in the fourth. Got a season-high 36 from DeMar DeRozan, so he had his best night in the Spurs uniform. Good night from LaMarcus Aldridge, which always pretends good things for the Spurs. But this is a team that's just inconsistent. Like you say, okay, well, this is something they can build on coming into tonight's game against Utah, but you don't know.
Not so fast.
Yeah, you don't know which team is going to show up. The team that showed up in Minnesota shows up in Utah tonight, they're going to get smoked. If the team that showed up against Portland or against Memphis earlier this month or against Indiana earlier on the previous road trip, if that team shows up, then they got a fighting chance to beat a Jazz team that coming into the year, I think a lot of people expected them to really be at the top of the fight for a spot near the top of the conference. If you'd have told me coming into the year the Jazz would be the number 2 team in the conference behind the Warriors, I wouldn't have batted an eye at that. But they've struggled a lot coming out of the gates. Weirdly, not very good at home, the Jazz are this year. I mean, that's usually a tough place to play is Salt Lake City. Not so much this year. They've got a losing record at home. So the Spurs maybe have an opportunity to steal a game that on the schedule when the schedule came out, didn't look like an easy win or a game they would be favored in. They have a chance to steal one if they can play as well and as cohesively as they did against the Trailblazers.
Well, let's put it on the record, Jeff. What do you think is going to happen tonight? The game's coming up here in just a matter of hours. Where are you putting your bets if you had to make some?
I don't trust the Spurs team on the road this year, so it doesn't matter.
I want that on a shirt. I don't trust the Spurs team on the road this year.
It doesn't matter who they're playing on the road. It's hard to say, yeah, that's a win. I think we did that on the previous road trip, looking at it going into Chicago. Like Chicago's just a dreadful Eastern Conference team. And you say, yeah, that's a win. And the Spurs did win that game.
By a point, right?
By 1 point.
Yeah.
1 point. So,
and that team doesn't have the same coach anymore.
Yeah, they don't. Yeah, the Spurs just don't have the they just haven't earned the right to be trusted on the road that so far. They're going to have to prove it to me before I say I feel good predicting a road win, especially against the team that, like I said, they're struggling, the Jazz at home, but they're still a very formidable team. And it will be a tough win if the Spurs were to get it.
All right, well, let's jump to something that maybe you could go a little bit more in depth on. You recently wrote an article, appeared in the Express News. You can check it out at expressnews.com. That was called Spurs Bleeding Out 3 Points at a Time. What a title. What's behind that?
Well, when you follow an NBA team around the country, as I do, and you hear their coach speak before every game, and sometimes multiple times before every game if he talks to shoot around, it starts to feel like you're following like a politician running for office around the country, because you start to hear some of the same stump speeches, some of the same things come up. And one of the things Greg Popovich has been I'll use the word railings. Part of it is in fun, is in jest, but railing against the 3-pointer. This isn't new. People know he's just not a fan of the 3-point shot. Likes basketball the way it was when he was a lad. And there's reasons for it, but his little spiel that he's given in Miami and Milwaukee and Chicago and basically everywhere there's microphones is, it's just kind of an arbitrary thing, a 3-point shot. It's just kind of a circus thing. Why isn't it 4 points? Why don't you make a 5-point shot? If everybody loves the 3-point shot, people would love the 5-point shot. But then if Popovich's view, it's not really the way basketball was meant to be played. So that said, he that's his just aesthetic opinion, what he finds the most aesthetically pleasing. But part and parcel of that is the Spurs take fewer 3-pointers than anyone in the league besides Cleveland. They're averaging 24.8 3-pointers a game, or at least they were at the time the article was written a couple of days ago. So they're at the top of the league, near the top of the league in accuracy. When they take them, they make them, but they don't take a whole bunch of them. And it's not really because Pop hates them. It's not like he's just stubbornly crossing his arms and threatening to find players that take 3-point shots. It's just that it's a combination of things. The league has gone 3-point crazy. That number I gave you earlier, 24.8 3-pointers per game. If you go back just 4 years to the year the Spurs won their last title in 2014, that number would have ranked 6th in the league. It's 29th now in 3-point attempts per game, but it would have been 6th back then. So there's been this surge in teams taking 3-point shots in a very, very, very short time. That's part of it. The other part of it is just the way the Spurs team is built. It's not a team that's built to just fire away from 3-point range. They want to take the best shots they can get. And the players they have, the guys that are going to have the ball in their hands the most, the guys you want taking the most shots, just aren't 3-point shooters. DeMar DeRozan, LaMarcus Aldridge. Rudy Gay has actually extended his range this year, but he was kind of known as a mid-range guy. And they also don't have, the Tony Parker from 4 or 5 years ago that's going to generate 3-point looks for your starting unit with his penetration. They just don't have that guy. That's how you generate 3-point shots, is to get a guy into the paint, make the defense collapse, and then shooters are open from the outside, and the Spurs just don't have that guy anymore. So, it would probably be foolish to go out there and say LaMarcus Aldridge needs to shoot, 8 threes a game, and DeMar DeRozan needs to shoot 5 threes a game. I think just the way they're built doesn't lend itself to that. And I don't think they're really built this way on purpose. This is just the players they have. When they had to trade Kawhi Leonard in the offseason, they didn't go out and say, let's find a guy that can't shoot threes or won't shoot threes. They just took the best player they were offered, and that's DeMar DeRozan, who's a guy that doesn't shoot 3-pointers. If Steph Curry had been available for Kawhi Leonard, the Spurs would have taken that deal, and they would have probably attempted a lot more 3-point shots this year. And it leads to the argument of, can you win that way in today's NBA? If the other team is getting their points 3 at a time and you're getting yours 2 at a time, there's sort of a math equation there that you're going to have to overcome. You're going to have to make more 2-pointers and be more efficient on your 2-pointers in order to compensate for the fact that the other team maybe is getting points in 3-point chunks. And the other thing you can do is get to the foul line a lot and make up some points that way on free throws. And the Spurs have been they've got players that can do that. DeRozan is a guy that lives at the foul line, and I believe they're the most accurate free throw shooting team in the league as well. So that's been helpful. But it's just sort of an interesting look at how the game has changed so much, and the Spurs are still kind of cutting against the grain a little bit, and maybe not 100% by design, but they're definitely not playing the game the way a lot of their peers are right now.
I gotta tell you, aside from that stump speech of not liking the 3-pointers, the second stump speech that Popovich has given out, 2 bottles of wine in every house. What is that? I recently saw online. I think everyone's saying that this wine rush in the NBA, it all goes back to San Antonio.
Yeah, that's as we all know, Pop loves his wine, and he will if you want to get him going on a topic, you don't ask him about pick and roll coverages and what they're going to do on defense. You ask him about the wine he had at dinner the night before. You'll probably get a good maybe that's what the the reporters that have to, the sideline reporters that have to interview Pop mid-game, and he gives them like 2-word answers.
Yeah, if they just asked about rosé or something like that.
Yeah. Ask about wine, and you could maybe get a longer answer.
Wow, pay attention, reporters. There we are, Jeff McDonald.
Pro tip. That's
throwing
a pro
it down.
tip.
There is an empty bottle of wine in that Utah hotel room. I can just tell. Let's get back on track here. Speaking about some upcoming games. So we got Utah in just a matter of hours. What's coming up after that?
This is a back-to-back, and it's going to be a tough back-to-back. They're playing Utah tonight, and then tomorrow, we're all on a plane to LA, and we're facing LeBron James and the Lakers. The Spurs have already beat LeBron James and the Lakers twice this year, both in the span of about 5 days in October. I think we all remember that thrilling game the last time the Spurs played the Lakers out in LA. Yeah, overtime. So, and then the one at home, I think the Spurs, it's the only game this year the Spurs have faced a double-digit deficit and come back and won. I think the Lakers have figured some things out since then, so that's going to be a tough game for the Spurs to pull off. And then they come home and they get 6 in a row at home, and I think that will be just helpful just to be in their own beds for a while because they've been traveling. Even though there's been a smattering of home games here or there, I think you're looking at like 10 of the last, after this trip is over, 10 of 14 will have been on the road, and even in that kind of stretch, even the home games almost feel like road games. Like you're not really unpacking your bags. You're not really, it sounds funny, but you're not getting like chores done, like just errands done that you need. Because I can just speak for myself. Like, my house is a wreck right now because I just haven't been home in enough.
Empty wine bottles everywhere. Yeah, no, I know what you mean.
Yeah, but the place could use a dusting. But so I think just being home for 6 games will be helpful, and it also becomes, if you've got 6 games at home, you need to win a bunch of them. Like the scheduling gods gave you a gift there. You go 3-3 at home, you're not really helping yourself. The Spurs right now going into this game tonight are below 500. It's a place they haven't spent a whole lot of time in the last 20 years or so. I think something like 55 days in 20 years, which is by far the least number of days below 500 in the NBA over that span. So you're below 500. You got this back-to-back that you may be further below 500 coming back home for that homestand. Got to win a lot of games on that homestand to sort of right the ship. That is an opportunity to right the ship if they will take advantage of it. If they go in there and they split those games 3-3, or heaven forbid, lose more than they win, that's going to be a tough blow. That's going to put them kind of deeper in a hole that they're going to have to spend the rest of the season digging out of.
Let's talk a little about the Spurs Nation, Jeff. When we were talking about, hey, what are we going to talk about on today's episode? Talked about good win against Portland, Minnesota, Houston, not so great times there. That huge loss combination they had. You called that something that has Spurs Nation jumping off a bridge, or maybe thinking about jumping off a bridge. What's it like to be a Spurs fan now? What are people thinking?
They're just not used to this, and you can't blame them. For 20 some odd years, they were kind of riding the gravy train the way fans of sports franchises in any sport never get. They're basically the Patriots of the NBA. That's the only really parallel that you've got. So to see them below 500 right now, like the losses, just getting annihilated in some of these games, and then bouncing back and having some quality wins too. That's an inconsistency the Spurs fans just aren't prepared to deal with, and I think, the realistically, if you're looking at it, you knew at some point when that Big Three era was over, you're going to have a period like this. Like, just, it doesn't go on forever. Like, the fact that it went on as long as it did is kind of an anomaly in the history of sports. As soon as you start losing your Tim Duncan, your Tony Parker, your Manu Ginobili, and then, they kind of thought Kawhi Leonard would be the guy that takes the baton into the next era, and you could build around him, and he would cover up a lot of the stuff you were losing by those star players. But they had to trade him. So now it's really like Pop used the phrase earlier this month. It's almost like an expansion team, like a new team. It's just being built from scratch. And, anybody that follows sports, expansion teams don't normally succeed in their first year. And so that's kind of where the Spurs are at, just trying to put some stuff together, and they have good players, or some good players. They're one of the few teams in the NBA that has 2 players off last year's All-NBA squad in Aldridge and DeRozan. But it just hasn't come together in a consistent manner yet. And so I think when you're a Spurs fan that is used to, the Spurs being consistent and winning 50 games a year, sometimes 60 games a year. And, you turn on that TV broadcast and you watch, every other night and you watch the team win. They win. They don't lose. They don't lose by 30. They win more than they win more than they lose. Like, you're just used to having a nice night. That's kind of your, you come home from work, you grill your steak, you prop up your feet, and you watch the Spurs beat somebody. Like, that's been the San Antonio tradition now for 20 some odd years, and it's just not happening right now. And I think it frustrates a lot of fans. And judging from my Twitter mentions, I think some people are losing their minds, I think. But it's kind of to be expected. Just not, people just aren't used to seeing the Spurs look mortal.
All right, Jeff, let's finish up with some positive news from that week of hell so long ago. People starting to come back. Lonnie Walker IV, he's been playing G League.
Yeah, they Spurs kind of put it. It's almost like a rehab assignment, like in baseball. Guys.
Oh yeah, you pitched for the farm team for a while. Yeah,
and that's kind of exactly what he's doing. He's down there. He's been on the shelf since October, and he's been working his way back from that knee injury that needed surgery to fix. And the way to do that is to go down there to Austin, or up there to Austin, I guess, if we're talking geographically, and play with the G League team. And so that's what he started off, I think, with a week of practice with them. And for the practice, they came to him. The whole team came up to San Antonio and worked out in the Spurs gym while the Spurs were out on the road. And so Walker worked out with them. Went with the G League team, played in a game on Friday, I believe. And I didn't see it because I was covering the Spurs that night, but by all accounts, looked pretty good. Little. I wouldn't say rusty, just winded, having not played in so long. I mean, he really hadn't played in a full basketball game since NBA Summer League, and he hadn't played in one that semi-counted since, the NCAA tournament in March. So that is really kind of behind schedule thanks to that injury. And I think that's kind of been something that's been disappointing to fans, certainly because, he was a pretty much ballyhooed rookie, number 18 in the draft, which is their highest original draft pick since Tim Duncan. He was a guy that I think fans were really looking forward to see, and then he suffers that torn meniscus in the preseason game. And now he's got to work his way back. And I think, I don't want to overhype his return, because I think he's going to play a lot of games in the G League first. I think, for a rookie, especially a 19-year-old rookie coming out of 1 year of college, missing all of training camp, missing basically all but 5 minutes of the preseason, that just puts you too far behind the 8 ball, especially when you're trying to learn everything about the NBA, everything about Greg Popovich's system. So I don't think he's a guy that's going to be contributing on the NBA level real soon. I think that might change. I think that might change. If we're sitting here in, let's say, February, and the Spurs are still, they've won 20 games and it's clear that they're not going to be a playoff team, maybe at that point you just start playing all your young guys to give them, court time and development time, and maybe we'll see a lot more of Lonnie Walker then. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he's just so impressive and so much better than the guys that are already playing on the team that, they bring him up here in 2 weeks and he sets the world on fire. But I wouldn't bet my money on that. And that's nothing against Lonnie Walker. It's just he's so far behind now, because there's steps to these things as a rookie. You start in summer league, and then training camp, and then preseason, and then early in the regular season, you get a few minutes, you get a taste of it. You build. He's really at the very beginning of that process right now. So I think it's good news that he's on the floor playing games and looking pretty good in the G League. But I just think it will be a while before he's in uniform for the San Antonio Spurs and making a difference at that level. But like I said, it's better to have guys coming back than not. It's good that he's making progress injury-wise.
And thank you to San Antonio Express News sports writer Jeff McDonald for joining me for today's episode of the Spurs Insider, our weekly NBA podcast from expressnews.com. For the San Antonio Express News, I'm Chance Dorland.